"Get off my lake or I'm calling the cops." That's the first thing I ever heard her say to me. It was barely 5 in the morning, the sun just cracking over the water, that golden light that makes everything shimmer like it belongs in a painting. My coffee cup was still warm in my hands, steam curling up into the crisp June air, and I was sitting on my dock with a fishing rod, watching the ripples dance across the lake. My idea of peace, my idea of home. And then that voice. Sharp, cutting, loaded with the kind of entitlement you can feel in your bones. It yanked me right out of my quiet morning like an alarm clock you can't shut off. At first I thought maybe I misheard. But then came the sound, heels clicking on wood, fast, deliberate. The crunch of gravel as a white sedan tore up my driveway like it was being chased. Dust filled the air, birds scattered from the trees, and out stepped a woman who practically radiated hostility. Bob, crisp khakis, a phone already raised like a weapon. I didn't know her name yet, but I knew exactly what she was, trouble. She pointed that phone at me as if I'd just broken into fort. "You're trespassing. This is community property." Her voice carried across the water, shrill, shaking with indignation. She wasn't asking, she was accusing. And there I sat, fishing rod balanced on my knee, blinking at her like maybe I'd woken up in someone else's nightmare. Trespassing? On my own dock. I'd signed the deed myself 3 months earlier. Every inspection, every notarized paper, every signature, I knew exactly what I owned. Yet here was this stranger acting like I was a criminal. My first instinct was to laugh. My second was to throw my coffee straight into the lake. But 20 years as a lawyer had trained me to hold steady when faced with unreasonable people. So I set the cup down carefully, stood up, and said, as calmly as I could, "Ma'am, I own this cabin, and this dock." She didn't even flinch, just kept filming, circling like a vulture that smelled blood. "I'm Christina, president of the Homeowners Association," she snapped, as if that title gave her the authority of a Supreme Court judge. "You're in violation of community standards. You cannot fish here without authorization." The words landed with this surreal weight. Community standards. Authorization. I'd spent 2 decades dealing with corporate sharks who thought they owned the world, but never in my life had I been accused of lowering property values by sitting quietly with a fishing pole. And then came the nuclear button. She dialed 911 right in front of me. I remember the moment so vividly, the way her voice cracked higher with every word as she told the dispatcher that I was destroying property values by fishing. The way her perfume clashed with the smell of lake water. The way her heels hammered against my dock like a countdown. That call was my warning shot, a sign of the storm that was coming. When the officer arrived 20 minutes later, Christina threw herself into the role of victim. She waved her phone like it held evidence of war crimes, her voice trembling with the kind of outrage that only comes from years of being obeyed without question. The officer listened, brows furrowed, then glanced at me. I handed over my deed, calm as you like. "Sir," he said finally, "this looks like a civil matter. You're on your own property." I saw the exact second Christina's face shifted from righteous fury to pure, red-faced humiliation. And I knew she wasn't going to let this go. She marched straight to my front door, slapped a paper against it, and stormed off in a squeal of tires. The words on that paper still burn in my memory. Violation, unauthorized lake usage. Fine $500. Cease and desist all water activities immediately. I stood there in the doorway, paper trembling in my hands, and thought, what kind of upside-down world did I just walk into? What I didn't realize then was that this was just the opening shot of a war. Christina wasn't just some nosy neighbor with too much time on her hands. She was playing a game, one I didn't even know existed yet. And the stakes weren't just my dock or even my cabin. They were so much bigger. The first night after that so-called violation notice, I barely slept. Every creak of the old cabin felt louder than usual. The wind rattled the loose screen on the porch, and for a split second, I thought it was Christina back to tape more papers to my door. Funny how fast peace can turn into paranoia. I told myself she'd cool off, that maybe the embarrassment from the cop brushing her off would be enough to make her back down. But I was wrong. So wrong. The very next morning, just as the sunlight was spilling through the pine trees, I heard the sound of tires crunching down my gravel drive again. My stomach sank. I stepped onto the porch, coffee in hand, and sure enough, there she was. Not alone this time. She had a clipboard, sunglasses, and a camera dangling around her neck like she was part of some official task force. She paced up and down the edge of my lawn, snapping pictures of my boat, my dock, even the rust stains on the side of my cabin. Every click of that camera felt like a nail being driven into the quiet life I'd come here for. I shouted out, trying to keep my voice calm. "Christina, what exactly do you think you're doing?" She didn't even look up. "Documenting violations." Her voice was sharp, clipped, the kind you use when you're not talking to a person but to a problem. Violations of what? Of existing. I'd handled billion-dollar lawsuits in my old career, but standing there in a t-shirt and boots on my porch, I'd never felt more powerless. Because this wasn't about law, it was about perception. About her convincing everyone else that I was the problem. And she was good at it. That afternoon, I went to check my mailbox, and my next-door neighbor, Mike Johnson, didn't wave. Normally, he'd call out a friendly morning while fiddling with his trash cans. Instead, he kept his head down, pretended to be busy. The silence was louder than words. By evening, I caught sight of two other neighbors standing across the street, whispering, glancing toward my cabin, then looking away when they noticed me. It was like Christina had poisoned the well overnight. The pressure built slowly, like water filling a glass. Christina driving by 4 times a day, slowing down just enough to raise her phone and take pictures. The neighbors' sideways glances, the sudden tension in the air thick enough to taste. And then came the whispers, snippets of conversation that drifted across the street when I worked in the yard. "He's suing the HOA. He's trying to take away the lake." She said he's a lawyer looking for loopholes. None of it was true, but truth didn't matter here. Influence did. That's when Mike finally came over. I'll never forget the look on his face, guilt and fear mixed together. He wouldn't meet my eyes, just kept fidgeting with the coffee cup I handed him. "Adam," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something and you're not going to like it." He told me Christina had been visiting neighbors, spinning stories. She claimed I moved here to exploit the community legally, that I'd use my background as a lawyer to strip away their lake access. She painted me as the villain, an outsider, a threat, and they believed her. But what hit me hardest was what Mike showed me next. A certificate. Fancy paper, gold seal, bold letters across the top. Premium lake access permit. I held it carefully, tilting it under the light. It looked official, county seals, legal language, insurance clauses. It was the kind of thing that could fool even a seasoned attorney at first glance. "How much did this cost you, Mike?" I asked, already dreading the answer. $3,000, he admitted, his cheeks burning. "We put it on a credit card. Christina said if we didn't get one, the county could fine us 10 grand, maybe even revoke our lake rights altogether." $3,000 for a piece of paper. I stared at him, and in that moment something clicked. Christina wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was running a con. A systematic scam preying on the trust of her own neighbors, fear and paperwork her weapons of choice. "Mike," I asked slowly, "are you the only one who bought this?" He shook his head, shame flooding his face. "At least 6 families, maybe more." And just like that, the scope of her game revealed itself. This wasn't about me fishing. It wasn't even about enforcing rules. It was about money, big money. I told Mike the truth, that permits like this didn't exist, that the county never required anything like it, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to believe me, but Christina had already dug her hooks deep. She'd been here for years, hosting block parties, organizing holiday decorations, waving that HOA president title like a badge of honor. Me? I was just the new guy on the block. Still, a seed of doubt had been planted in him, and I knew I had to water it with proof. The next day, I drove to the county office. The clerk, a tired-looking woman named Sarah, examined Mike's certificate. She held it up to the light, ran her fingers across the seal, then looked up at me with a frown. "Sir, this isn't one of ours. The seal's wrong, and we don't issue permits like this at all." Forgery, that was her word, forgery. I left the office with a storm brewing inside me. What started as a fishing dispute had just escalated into federal crime territory. fraud, forged government documents, extortion. By the time I pulled back into my driveway, Christina's car was already there, idling at the end of the street like a shark circling prey. And when our eyes met, she gave me the faintest smile. Cold, knowing, like she was daring me to push back. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white, because I understood something right then and there. This wasn't going to end with one fine or one forged certificate. Christina was building something much bigger, and I was standing directly in her way. The day after I visited the county clerk, I woke up to the sound of gravel crunching outside my window again. That same white sedan, that same deliberate pause in front of my house. Christina sat in the driver's seat with her phone angled just high enough to make sure I saw the lens pointed straight at me. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The message was clear. I'm watching you. By the fourth time she circled that day, it stopped being intimidation and started feeling like surveillance. Every time I stepped out to cut wood or water the small patch of grass near my porch, there she was, lurking at the end of the street, clicking away like she was building a case file. The neighbors noticed, too. My morning wave from Mrs. across the road turned into a curtain flutter. Mike, who used to crack jokes about his computer job, barely made eye contact. Christina's poison was spreading faster than I could counter it. And then, as if paranoia wasn't enough, she escalated. That evening I found a crisp notice taped to every door in the neighborhood, bold letters across the top, mandatory community meeting, environmental crisis. Attendance required. Location, the community center. Time, 7 p.m. sharp. I stood in my driveway reading the notice under the fatting porch light, the paper trembling in my hand. Environmental crisis. I could already smell the manipulation, but curiosity burned in me too. If Christina was bold enough to print this, then whatever she was planning had to be big. The next evening I walked into that cramped little community center, the smell of folding chairs and old carpet filling the air. Nearly every resident was there, faces tight, whispers buzzing like a hive. And at the front, Christina stood tall behind a table, dressed in a blazer like she was running for Congress. Beside her, a man I'd never seen before. Middle-aged, cheap suit, a badge clipped to his jacket that looked just a little too shiny to be real. "Thank you all for coming," Christina began, her voice dripping with fake authority. "We are facing a serious environmental emergency that threatens our homes, our property values, and the future of this lake." She clicked a button, and it flickered to life on the wall. Stock photos of dead fish, polluted streams, murky water. She gestured at the screen as if she'd just uncovered a government investigation. "Unauthorized fishing," she declared, her eyes sliding toward me in the back row, "has disrupted our protected waterfowl habitat. Immediate action is required." A murmur rippled through the crowd. People shifted uneasily in their chairs, and then the man in the cheap suit stepped forward, clearing his throat. "I'm Inspector Stone," he announced, his voice overly formal, almost theatrical. "The county has identified violations of the Federal Waterfowl Protection Act." My stomach dropped, but not out of fear, out of disbelief. There is no Federal Waterfowl Protection Act. It doesn't exist. The guy was reciting buzzwords like he'd memorized them off a pamphlet. He kept flipping index cards as if the script had been written by someone who barely skimmed a nature documentary. But the neighbors didn't know that. They heard federal and violation, and panic spread like wildfire. Christina seized the moment. "To save our lake," she declared, "every household must contribute a $1,000 environmental restoration fee. And starting tonight, each family will be required to purchase an environmental compliance certificate, 500 each, to avoid prosecution." She held up a stack of shiny new papers, seals embossed in gold, signatures scrawled across the bottom. And the fear in the room was so thick, I could feel it pressing against me. I sat there, phone in my pocket, recording every word, every fraudulent claim. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of what I was witnessing. She had weaponized trust, fear, and environmental concern into a perfect storm of manipulation. One by one, I watched hands go up when she called for a vote. 19 out of 28 residents, ready to hand over money just to make the nightmare go away. That's when I stood, slowly, Calmly, every eye turned to me, and for a moment the only sound was the hum of the projector. Christina's smile faltered. The fake inspector shifted nervously. "I've got a question," I said evenly. "Inspector Stone, what county department did you say you represent again?" The man froze. His lips parted, but no words came out. His eyes darted toward Christina like a schoolboy caught cheating on a test. She jumped in fast, rattling off something about joint federal-county partnerships. But the seed of doubt was planted. A few neighbors furrowed their brows. A couple lowered their raised hands. Christina pushed harder, ramping up her voice, insisting that federal enforcement could begin as early as next week. Her urgency was calculated. Fear was her fuel. But as I watched, I realized something. She wasn't just playing power games anymore. This was about money, real money, tens of thousands of dollars. By the end of the meeting, residents shuffled out clutching compliance notices, looking terrified, convinced that a fake law and a fake inspector had just sentenced them to financial ruin. Christina had them wrapped around her finger, almost all of them. But not me. Because while they saw a polished presentation, I saw fraud. While they heard federal violation, I heard a desperate scam. And while they felt fear, I felt resolve. As I walked back to my cabin under the the night thick with summer humidity, I knew Christina had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She'd run her scam in front of the wrong man. A man who'd spent 20 years dissecting lies in courtrooms. A man who knew exactly how to build a case, piece by piece, until the truth crushed the fraud. And starting tonight, her little empire of fake authority was already collapsing. The morning after that so-called emergency meeting, I sat on my dock with my coffee, staring at the water like it could give me answers. The lake was glassy, calm, reflecting streaks of orange and gold from the rising sun. It should have been peaceful, but all I could hear in my head was Christina's voice booming through that projector screen. Federal Waterfowl Protection Act. $1,000 restoration fee. Certificates. It was absurd, it was fake, but she'd convinced nearly the whole neighborhood, and that's what gnawed at me. Fear doesn't need to be true to work, it just needs to be loud. My phone buzzed against the wood of the dock. Unknown number. Normally, I'd ignore it, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Rogers," the voice on the other end was low, shaky. "This is Tom Stone, we need to talk privately." Stone, the fake inspector. My chest tightened, ready for another fight. But his tone wasn't the same smug performance from last night. It was nervous, guilty. We met later that day at a coffee shop 2 towns over. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. No badge, no suit. Just a tired-looking man in a wrinkled shirt, his eyes darting around like a hunted animal. He sat down across from me, hands trembling as he opened a worn manila folder. "First off," he said, voice breaking, "I need to apologize. I'm not a county inspector. Christina made me do that. Everything I said last night was a lie." I didn't speak. I just let him keep unraveling, like a man finally deciding confession was safer than silence. "I'm actually a licensed surveyor," he continued. "Christina hired me months ago to run boundary checks on properties in this subdivision. What I found scared her. That's why she roped me into her scheme." He slid a folded survey across the table. I opened it carefully, the paper crisp and professional, covered in measurements and dotted lines. My heart started racing. "According to this," Tom said, pointing at the map, "your lot doesn't just include the cabin and yard. It extends 20 feet into the lake. And more importantly, it includes the original subdivision easement, the only legal access point this community has to the water." The words hit like a hammer. Easement, access point. It meant my little cabin didn't just come with a dock. It came with the keys to the entire community's lake rights. Tom leaned closer, whispering now, as if Christina could hear us from miles away. "Without your easement, every other property here loses legal lake access. No boats, no fishing, nothing. You own the choke point." I gripped the edges of the paper, the weight of it sinking in. My legal brain lit up like a Christmas tree. Christina hadn't been panicking about fishing rods or morning coffee. She'd been panicking about control. My easement wasn't just valuable. It was leverage, massive leverage. But Tom wasn't finished. He pulled out another document, this one thicker, stamped with signatures and logos, a development contract. "She signed this 2 months before you even bought the cabin," he said. "With a company called Lakefront Properties, LLC. It promises she'll deliver exclusive lake rights for a resort project worth $50 million. Her cut, $5 million. I stared at the contract, the air and the suddenly too thin. $5 million. That's what all this was about. Not property values, not community standards, not birds or fish. Christina was trying to turn this sleepy little lakeside community into a gold mine, and I was the boulder in her way. Tom flipped to the last page, where Christina's signature sprawled across the bottom like a smug flourish. She told the investors she controlled lake access through the HOA, that she could push out any holdout owners with enforcement actions. She never expected someone like you to move in with the legal deed in hand. I sat back, my coffee going cold, my mind reeling. Everything made sense now. The fines, the fake inspector, the environmental scare. It was all part of a pressure campaign to drive me out, to claim my easement for herself, to hand the lake to developers and walk away with millions. "Why tell me this now?" I finally asked. "Why not sooner?" Tom's face crumpled. "Because she threatened me, said if I talked, she'd ruin me. File complaints with the licensing board, claim my surveys, destroy my career. I kept quiet until I realized she's spiraling. She's desperate, Mr. Rogers. Her investors want results by July 15th. If she doesn't deliver lake rights by then, she has to return $2 million in advance payments, money she's already spent." $2 million, my jaw clenched. No wonder she was unraveling, circling my house, tapping fines to doors, staging fake meetings. She wasn't just greedy, she was drowning. And desperate people do reckless things. Then Tom showed me the final piece. A USB drive full of recorded conversations. Christina's voice, clear as day, outlining her plan, fake violations, forged certificates, fabricated environmental crises, even laughing about how gullible the neighbors were. I closed the folder, feeling the weight of it all pressing down. For weeks, I'd thought I was fighting a petty tyrant with too much time on her hands. But this wasn't about HOA drama anymore. This was federal fraud, organized deception, millions of dollars in play. And I wasn't just a victim. I was the lock holding back her payday. As Tom slid the folder back into his bag, his eyes darted toward the window. "Be careful," he warned. "She knows I've been talking to you, and she's not going to stop, not until she gets what she wants or until someone stops her." That night, back in my cabin, I spread the survey and the contract across my kitchen table. My hands traced the boundary lines, the notations, the signatures. The wood grain beneath the paper felt rough, grounding, reminding me that this was real. The lake outside was silent, the moon reflecting in silver streaks. Somewhere out there, Christina was probably plotting her next move. But for the first time since she stormed into my life, I wasn't scared. Because now I knew the truth, and truth in the right hands is a weapon sharper than any blade. By the end of that week, Christina called another mandatory HOA meeting. The notice was printed on thick this time, bold red letters screaming across the top. Final enforcement action. Neighbors whispered about it for days, at the gas station, at the mailbox cluster. Even Mike, who had been warming up to me again, admitted he was nervous. "She says anyone who doesn't pay the compliance fee by Friday will lose their property rights." His voice cracked like he wasn't sure if he was repeating fact or fear. I didn't tell him everything Tom had shown me, not yet. I needed the timing to be perfect. The meeting was set for Thursday night in the same community center. By the time I walked in, the place was packed shoulder to shoulder, sweat hanging heavy in the air from the summer heat. Folding chairs scraped against the floor, voices echoed sharp, restless. And at the front of the room, Christina stood taller than ever, her blazer crisp, her lips curled in that permanent sneer of control. She banged a gavel against the table. Yes, a gavel, like she was some kind of judge instead of a neighbor with a title she'd given herself. "This is the final warning," she announced. "Failure to comply with HOA directives will result in liens on your property and immediate suspension of lake privileges. Non-payment will be reported to county officials." I felt the room shift, mothers clutching their kids, older couples muttering, younger families glaring nervously at one another. Fear had a scent that night, acrid, heavy. Christina raised a stack of envelopes. Tonight, I will personally serve final violation notices to every non-compliant resident. Consider this your last chance. That's when I stood up, calm, deliberate. My heart was racing, but my voice came out steady. Before you hand those out, Christina, I said, loud enough for the back row to hear, I think everyone here deserves the truth. Dozens of heads turned. Christina froze, her smile tight, eyes narrowing like a hawk spotting prey. I held up my phone. For weeks, you've told this community that lake permits, compliance certificates, and federal violations are real, but I've spoken with the county office, and I've got confirmation none of it exists. Gasps rippled through the room. A few people leaned forward in their chairs. Christina snapped back instantly. He's lying. He's not even a real resident. He bought that cabin under a shell company. I cut her off. I own my cabin outright, and more importantly, I paused, letting the silence build. I own the legal easement, the only official access point to this lake. The room went dead quiet. You could hear the hum of the old ceiling fan spinning overhead. Neighbors looked at one another, confusion spreading like fire. Christina's face flushed crimson. That's ridiculous. The HOA controls lake rights. I took a step forward, pulled out the folded survey Tom had given me, and held it up. This is the certified county survey. It shows the easement falls entirely on my lot. Without it, none of you have legal access. Not a single dock, not a single boat. Christina has been lying to you from the start. Murmurs erupted, some angry, some terrified. And then slowly I played my trump card. I tapped my phone, and Christina's own voice filled the room, echoing off the cheap paneling of the community center walls. We'll just scare them into paying. Call it federal if you want. People don't check. Once we've got the certificates sold, we flip the lakefront to the developers. I'll have $5 million in the bank before these idiots even realize. The recording cut off, but the damage was done. Neighbors' faces shifted, shock, betrayal, fury. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with her hands. Mike's jaw fell open. Even Mrs., usually too timid to speak above a whisper, stood up. You've been stealing from us, she said, voice shaking with rage. All those certificates, all those threats, it was all fake. Christina stammered, that recording is doctored, it's out of context. But no one was buying it. One man shouted from the back, I paid you $4,000, Christina. You said my kids couldn't swim without a permit. Another woman stood. You told us the county would seize our homes if we didn't pay. The room dissolved into chaos. Voices rising, chairs scraping, hands pointing. Christina slammed the gavel, yelling over the noise, but the crowd had turned. The authority she wielded like a sword just hours earlier now crumbled into dust. I stepped closer to the table, my voice calm but firm. You threatened me. You tried to extort me. You tried to defraud this entire community, but the game is over. She lunged toward me, snatching at the survey in my hand, but Mike stepped between us, blocking her. For the first time, he stood with me, and then another neighbor moved in, and another, until Christina found herself surrounded, her control collapsing under the weight of her own lies. Someone shouted, call the sheriff. And for the first time that summer, Christina's heels faltered. She backed away, her gavel clattering to the floor. Her voice, once booming, shrank to a desperate hiss. You'll all regret this, she spat. You don't know who you're dealing with. But this time, no one flinched. I walked out of that meeting under the heavy summer night, cicadas screaming in the trees. For weeks, I'd been isolated, treated like an intruder. But as neighbors followed me out, some nodding, some clapping me on the back, I realized the tide had finally turned. Christina had lost her grip. But I also knew, deep in my gut, that she wasn't done. Desperate people don't walk away quietly, especially not when millions are at stake. And as I unlocked my cabin door that night, the weight of the survey still in my hands, I felt it. A storm still brewing on the horizon. 2 nights after the meeting, I was jolted awake by the sound of tires on gravel. Headlights flashed across my bedroom wall, sweeping like searchlights. Then came the pounding, hard, sharp against my front door. I pulled on my boots and opened it to find two deputies standing there, hands on their belts, Christina hovering behind them in her white sedan like a general commanding soldiers. Her voice cut through the night, shrill and triumphant. "He's threatening me, he's trespassing, he's destroying community property." The deputies looked tired, unimpressed, but they still asked me to step outside. I handed them the deed again, the survey again, even the recording I'd played at the meeting. One of them sighed, rubbing his temples, muttering, "We've been out here 3 times this week already." Finally, he turned to Christina. "Ma'am, this is a civil matter. You can't keep using 911 like this." Her face twisted into something dark. She didn't scream, she didn't fight. She just glared at me, lips curled into a thin smile, and hissed, "This isn't over." That night, sleep never came back. Every creak of the cabin made my nerves jump. I left the porch light on until dawn. But Christina wasn't done with police games. Over the next week, they came 3 more times, noise complaints, trespassing calls, even a bogus claim that I was dumping chemicals into the lake. Each time, the deputies grew more annoyed. One finally told me, "Off the record, sir, she's walking herself into harassment charges. Keep documenting." So I did every false report, every fine she taped to my door, every time she slowed her sedan outside my cabin with her phone raised. I built a record brick by brick, knowing that one day it would be the wall that trapped her. But Christina wasn't just fighting on paper anymore. She was lashing out physically. One morning, I found deep scratches down the side of my truck, like keys dragged with deliberate malice. Another night, the dock ropes on my boat were cut clean through, leaving it drifting halfway into the lake. And then came the worst. Broken glass scattered across my driveway, sharp enough to shred tires if I hadn't spotted it in time. I stood there in the early dawn light, the crunch of glass under my boots, my breath fogging in the cold air, and felt the weight of it. This wasn't just intimidation. It was sabotage, and it was escalating. The neighbors saw it too. Mike came by one evening, shifting nervously on my porch. "She's been telling people you staged that recording," he admitted. "That you doctored it, but folks are starting to question her. They've seen her circling your house. They've seen the deputies out here night after night." I nodded, tired but grateful. The truth has a way of catching up, Mike. It just takes time. Still, the toll was real. I started sleeping in short bursts, shotgun leaning against the wall by my bed. My morning coffee on the dock wasn't peaceful anymore. It was surveillance, scanning the tree line for headlights, listening for the crunch of gravel. The lake that once felt like sanctuary now felt like a battlefield. And then came the letter, delivered by certified mail, heavy with legal jargon. Christina had hired an attorney, or at least claimed to. The letter accused me of interference with community governance, defamation, and fraudulent misrepresentation of property rights. It threatened to sue me for damages exceeding $250,000. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands, anger boiling. Not because I thought she had a case. She didn't. The survey, the deed, the recordings, they were airtight. But because I knew what this really was, another weapon. Another attempt to bleed me dry, to scare me into folding. I drafted my response that same night. 3 pages, professional, precise. Every false claim dismantled with evidence. The sheriff's office, the county clerk, and even the state attorney general. If Christina wanted war, I'd give her one, but it would be fought on my terms, not hers. Days turned into weeks, the heat of July thick in the air. Christina grew more erratic. Some mornings she'd march through the neighborhood barking orders, clipboard in hand, trying to look authoritative. Other days she'd vanish, her car gone for hours, only to return at night with stacks of papers she'd taped to mailboxes like propaganda leaflets. But the cracks were showing. Neighbors stopped opening their doors when she knocked. They removed the HOA rules signed from their yard. Mike told me 3 families had filed complaints with the county after realizing their permits were worthless. Christina's empire was rotting from the inside out, and she knew it. One night, just after sunset, I stood on my porch watching fireflies blink across the yard when she appeared again, this time on foot. No phone, no clipboard, just her standing at the edge of my driveway, staring. "You think you've won?" she said, her voice low, shaking. "But you don't understand. If I go down, this whole place goes with me. The lake, the homes, everything." I didn't respond. I just let the silence stretch until she finally turned and walked away, her figure swallowed by the dark. And in that silence, a thought settled heavy in my chest. She wasn't just fighting for pride anymore. She was fighting for survival. For millions she couldn't afford to lose, and desperate people cornered will do anything. The war wasn't ending. It was reaching its most dangerous point. It was the night the storm rolled in. Not just the one in the sky, the one in my life. Thunderheads gathered over the lake, stacking in layers of gray and black, the kind of storm you can feel in your chest before it hits. The air smelled metallic, electric. My cabin windows rattled with each gust of wind. And then, right on cue, the gravel crunched. Headlights lit up my porch. Christina's sedan. She didn't even bother parking this time. She left it running, headlights blasting like interrogation lamps. The pounding on my door was frantic, desperate. I opened it a crack, and there she was, hair damp from the wind, mascara streaked down her cheeks. She shoved a paper in my face. "You're done," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "This is an injunction. You're barred from using the dock until the court hearing." I took the paper, scanned it quickly under the flickering porch light. My legal instincts kicked in instantly. It was a forgery. Wrong formatting, wrong stamps. A sloppy attempt at looking official. My stomach twisted. She was unraveling. "Christina," I said quietly, "this isn't real, and you know it." She screamed, a raw sound torn from her throat, then hurled the paper into the rain-soaked yard. "You ruined everything." That's when I realized the headlights weren't the only lights in the dark. Red and blue flashed down the road. A sheriff's cruiser pulled up, its siren cutting off with a wail. Christina froze, caught like a child with her hand in the cookie jar. Deputy stepped out, rain plastering his uniform, flashlight beam cutting through the storm. "Ma'am," he called firmly, "step away from the property." Christina spun toward him, voice rising. "Finally, arrest him. He's trespassing, he's defrauding the whole community." But didn't look at me, he looked straight at her. "Christina," his voice was flat, official. "We have a warrant for your arrest. Fraud, forgery, harassment, misuse of emergency services." The color drained from her face. She shook her head violently, backing away. "No, no, this is a mistake. I am the HOA president. I am protecting this community." Two more deputies appeared from the cruiser, moving in quick, efficient steps. Christina stumbled backward, slipping in the wet gravel, hands flailing as they caught her wrists and pulled them behind her. The sound of the cuffs snapping shut cut through the thunder. Neighbors' porch lights flicked on, one by one, as doors opened. Faces appeared, pale in the storm glow. Mike, even the families who had once avoided me, they all stepped out, silent witnesses to the downfall of the woman who had ruled their lives with fear. Christina screamed as they guided her to the cruiser. "You'll regret this. All of you, I built this place. I own this lake." Her voice cracked into sobs, then disappeared beneath the slam of the car door. And just like that, the storm broke. Rain hammered down in sheets, soaking me to the bone as I stood on the porch watching the taillights fade. The thunder rolled across the lake, echoing like the sound of chains snapping after years of tension. Deputy approached, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "We've been building a case for weeks," he admitted. "Your recordings, your documentation, they made it airtight. She'll be facing a lot more than just fines." I nodded, my throat tight. Relief should have flooded me, but instead there was this heavy, hollow ache. Because even in victory, there's loss. The lake wasn't the same quiet refuge anymore. The neighbors weren't the same trusting families. And I wasn't the same man who'd once thought fishing at sunrise could be a simple joy. Over the next days, news spread like wildfire. Local papers ran headlines. "HOA president arrested for multi-million-dollar fraud." The county announced an investigation into Lakefront Properties, LLC. Investors pulled out. And neighbors who had once glared at me in suspicion now knocked on my door with casseroles and apologies. Mike was the first. He stood on my porch, hat in his hands, eyes full of regret. "Adam, I'm sorry I ever believed her. We all were scared. She fed us lies and we swallowed them whole." I shook his hand firmly. Fear makes people do things they never thought they would, Mike. What matters is what you do when the truth comes out. The neighborhood began to heal slowly. The fake permits were burned in backyard fire pits. The compliance notices were torn down from mailboxes. Kids played near the lake again, laughter echoing across the water instead of whispers of fear. And me, I started fishing again at sunrise, coffee steaming in the cool morning air. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It was heavier, fuller, touched by the memory of the battle we'd all just survived. Because the truth is, victory doesn't always feel like triumph. Sometimes it feels like exhaustion. Sometimes it feels like standing alone on a dock, knowing you fought a storm and made it through. But you'll never look at the horizon the same way again. That night, as the lake settled under the moonlight, I found myself whispering words I didn't expect. Sometimes, the strongest people aren't the ones who fight loudest. They're the ones who refuse to break, even when the world turns against them. Christina had tried to break me. She failed. But her shadow would linger for a long time. The weeks after Christina's arrest felt strangely quiet. Too quiet. For so long, the hum of this place had been filled with her presence, her car circling, her phone flashing, her voice cutting through every gathering. Now her absence rang louder than her presence ever did. At first, the neighborhood was cautious. People kept their heads down like they weren't sure if it was really over. Some still half expected her to march back in, gavel in hand, declaring it all a misunderstanding. But as days turned to weeks, the silence grew comfortable. Peace began to seep back into the cracks she'd carved open. I remember the first real sign of change. It was a Saturday morning. The grandkids were out by the lake, tossing pebbles into the water. No permits, no clipboards, just laughter and splashes and sunlight bouncing off the ripples. For the first time in months, the sound of joy replaced the sound of fear. Neighbors started talking again, on porches, over fences, at the little gas station where we all bought bait and coffee. They apologized not just to me but to each other for letting suspicion grow where trust should been. And slowly a sense of community, real community, returned. Mike came by more often, sometimes with fresh firewood, sometimes just to sit on the porch with a beer. He told me about the night after the arrest when half the neighborhood gathered in his garage to talk things out. We all realized something, he said. We let fear blind us. We gave her power because we were too scared to question her. Never again. I nodded, sipping my drink, the cicadas buzzing in the trees. Fear is a strong weapon, I said quietly, but truth lasts longer. The county's case against Christina built quickly. Between Tom's folder, the forged documents, and the recordings, prosecutors had more than enough. Word spread that she'd taken plea deals, but the charges stacked high. Fraud, forgery, harassment, misuse of emergency services. The $5 million dream she'd been chasing crumbled into dust. The developers walked away. The lake stayed ours. And as for the HOA, it collapsed. Without Christina, there was no heart to it, no authority. Neighbors voted to dissolve it entirely, opting instead for a voluntary association. For the first time in years, people felt free. I kept the survey framed on my wall, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. That piece of paper had been the key to everything, the truth that unraveled the lies. Sometimes the smallest details carry the heaviest weight. But victory didn't mean forgetting. Even after she was gone, her shadow lingered. At night, when the wind howled through the pines, I'd still catch myself glancing at the driveway, half expecting headlights. Some mornings, when I sipped my coffee on the dock, I'd still hear echoes of her voice in the back of my mind. Trauma doesn't vanish, it settles like silt at the bottom of a lake. Invisible, but always there. And yet life returned. One evening I walked to the lake as the sun was setting, painting the water in streaks of gold and crimson. Families were out, fishing lines cast, coolers open, kids chasing each other along the shoreline. The sound of laughter carried across the water, and for the first time I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Real peace. Mike waved from his boat, a wide grin across his face. "About time you brought that rod of yours back out here," he shouted. I smiled, lifting my old fishing pole, the reel catching the last rays of sun. For a moment, it felt like the beginning all over again. Me, the lake, and the quiet that had drawn me here in the first place. But now that quiet carried meaning. It had been fought for, protected, earned. As the first fish tugged on my line, I found myself reflecting on it all. How quickly fear can twist good people into turning on one another. How fragile trust really is. And how sometimes the battles we never wanted are the ones that show us who we really are. Christina thought power was about control, about money, about silencing anyone who stood in her way. But in the end, power belonged to truth. And truth doesn't shout. It doesn't need clipboards or gavels. It waits, patient and steady, until lies collapse under their own weight. I looked out over the lake, the sky deepening into twilight, and whispered to myself, sometimes karma doesn't come fast, but it always comes. Christina learned that the hard way. And me, I just wanted to fish in peace. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next mystery on HOA Hunter Stories.